Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Today, debt-free is dumb. This has never been more true than it is now, with real interest rates potentially even lower than the rate of inflation. In fact, has debt-free even become a poverty marker? I'll answer that. Paying off your low interest rate debt won't make you wealthy, but using good debt to build income streams will. A fresh take on the foundational financially free beats debt free. It's debt free is dumb. Today on Get Rich Education. The people that our listeners can't stop talking about are Ridge Lending Group and MLS 42056. They've provided you with more loans than anyone. It's where I got my last few loans, and they finance single-family income property up to fourplexes. They're the number one lender for both beginners and veterans. Start your pre-qualification, chat with President Chaley Ridge personally, and you'll end up with your custom plan for expanding your cash flowing portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE, from the 7 hills of Rome to the 5 boroughs of New York City and across 188 nations worldwide. I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education. Debt-free is not the place to be, especially if you're in real estate, even if you just own your own home and no rental property, that's true. But see, going back to adopting the abundance mentality, if you think that money is a scarce resource, then you would be afraid to owe it to somebody, which would lead to thinking that debt is necessarily bad. In a lot of cases, debt-free is dumb today. Now, understand that I'm not calling any one person dumb here, but some people will eat dirt, pound sand, work overtime, and lose out on some of the best years and experiences of their life to soulless servitude for years and struggle and merely exist rather than live because they think that debt-free is the fast path. Look, there are 2 cases when debt is good. Number 1, debt is good when its interest rate is lower than inflation. And number 2, debt is good when someone pays your debt for you. Therefore, you would be better off reinvesting dollars rather than retiring secured debt. Anymore, you can often borrow for less than the long-term rate of inflation. Take the case of your primary residence where you can get an interest rate below 3%. Take into account the tax deductions on the mortgage interest, and your real interest rate can then be 2.5%, maybe even down toward 2%. Well, that's lower than the long-term rate of inflation of about 3%. Well, then if you borrow for less than the rate of inflation, the dollar is losing purchasing power faster than interest that you would have to pay can possibly accrue. It cannot keep up. And then the second case of good debt, that case of, say, a cash flowing rental property, debt is good when it is outsourced completely to tenants. Both the tenants paying your mortgage for you debases your debt, and inflation simultaneously debases the amount of real debt that you owe back to the bank. So in either case, again, number 1, debt is good when its interest rate is lower than inflation. And number 2, debt is good when someone else pays your debts for you. Gosh, both cases could even be true at the same time for you. If you've got a cash flowing rental and the interest rate is low enough, debt is good when you're on top of debt like this and not trapped underneath it. So I'm still trying to figure out my favorite 4-letter word. Is it debt or is it loan? It might be one or the other. So when I say that debt-free is dumb, I'm not talking about 18% APR credit card debt. That debt is unsecured, meaning that it's not tied to any collateral, plus you have to pay that debt yourself besides being at a high interest rate. Financially free beats debt-free. Understand that. Financially free means that you can do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it, and therefore money really isn't the primary determinant of whether you get to enjoy that activity or not. Debt-free simply means you don't owe anyone anything. But if you don't borrow responsibly to expand toward financial freedom through leverage and cash flow, well, then you have maimed yourself in trying to become more successful. So we're talking about why financially free beats debt free. That's actually a catchphrase that I had trademarked in 2019. Now, if you're uninitiated in this school of thought, well, sometimes it takes a paradigm shifting idea to prompt change. Now, has debt become so cheap and so plentiful that being debt free has even become a poverty marker? Has it gone that far? Here's an example of what I mean. Say that you learn about a man that has $20 million in total debt. Does that sound terrible? Does $20 million in debt sound like an awful position to be in? What if I told you that this person was a businessman and a founder and a CEO of an influential e-commerce company, and with his $20 million in debt, he has $120 million in assets? See, once you get around finance, you start to realize that for someone to even get access to $20 million of debt, well, then they would have to be a pretty credit-worthy person. See, a poor person with few assets or low income would never even get the opportunity to get eight-figure debt like this. Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, for example, got a mortgage for his home, although it was totally unnecessary. He could have paid for it all cash. He can't afford the opportunity cost of retiring that debt. I'm going to guess that Zuck has a lot more debt than just $20 million because he is financially savvy and the value of his assets is multiples greater than the value of his debt. Can you afford to have the entire value of your home all tied up with 100% equity in it, meaning that you had a zero mortgage balance? So when the interest rates can now be lower than inflation for homes and a consumer good like a car, then is not having any debt even a poverty marker? No, I think that's going a bit too far, saying that debt-free is a poverty marker. But today, if you see zero debt on someone's balance sheet, you've got to wonder about the financial savvy of that person. I myself, I would be nowhere without debt. I would not have been able to buy that first fourplex almost totally with the bank's money and the tenants servicing that monthly debt. My own home that I live in, my primary residence, that could be paid off this week if I wanted to do it, but instead I have the maximum amount of debt against it. I mean, the maximum that I can find, and over time, I do cash out refinances so that it stays that way. I think it's important that you understand something here. Many people have believed the same old antiquated things for so long that they figure that the notion that has been believed for so long must absolutely be true merely because it's been believed for a long time. Yes, just because you believe something for a long time does not make it true, like desiring a paid-off home. Even if it is paid off, you can usually go back and get a loan against that and correct that problem. And you know what else many people think? A lot of people, hey, they still think that the dollar is backed by gold, even though President Nixon totally depegged us from that 50 years ago. In 1971, it is 2021. Gosh, many people think that when they put a deposit of their money in a bank, that deposit is converted into cash and goes into their own vault with their name on it. Oh, dear. Well, similarly, people think that debt-free is still the way to be a lot of times. When mortgage rates breached 18% back in the year 1981, well, maybe debt-free was somewhat more desirable, and maybe that's why your grandparents and your parents thought that debt is always something bad. Well, this nonsense debt-free at all costs mantra persists, and it's just not valid anymore. If you had enough money to pay off your home mortgage right now, would you do that? A lot of people actually would. In fact, some people think that part of the American dream is to own your own home and own it outright mortgage-free. Well, if that dream is so wonderful, then why do countless financially successful people that really understand things, who have more than enough money to pay off their mortgage, refuse to pay it off? Well, a paid-off home, that means that now you've lost your leverage. A lot of times, people need to unlearn the old before they can even make room for new ideas. It's a process of unlearning a lot of times, because eliminating your debt, that often postpones your financial freedom. You need to form both the habits and actions that produce income streams, grow your upside. You can't do that very well if you put your money toward retiring low interest rate debt. Instead, focusing too much on becoming debt free, that means then that you have sent your money away to retire. That's why you can't retire or be financially free, because you've sent your money away to retire rather than work for you, and more accurately, rather than using your money to leverage other people's money to work for you. If you could invest in something then that could never go up in value, but this thing could only go down in value, how much of this investment that I'm describing would you want? Well, you wouldn't want any of that scenario, right? You've got no upside. We've cultivated a listenership of pretty intelligent people here that invest for the production of income primarily, and not only speculate on the hope for capital gains. Well, the investment that can never go up in value, but can only go down in value, is home equity, or yes, even your rental property's equity, just the same. So I embrace mortgages. I don't fear them. You know, many Americans, Brits, Canadians, Australians, everywhere, they all believe a number of statements to be true, but these things are really just more myths and misconceptions. People believe that home equity is a prudent investment. That is false. People believe extra principal payments on your mortgage saves you money. That's false. Mortgage interest should be eliminated as soon as possible. Certainly not. That's false. Substantial equity in your home enhances your net worth. That's false. Home equity has a rate of return. Oh, that is completely false, because the rate of return from home equity is, and always will be, zero. There is a reason why so many people fear mortgages, and why you should not. So in order to discover how our grandparents and even our parents, perhaps you got the idea that a mortgage is a bad thing and a necessary evil at best, what we have to do is go back in time to the 1930s Great Depression, and then we're going to bring it up to the present day here. In the 1920s, a common clause in loan agreements gave banks the right to demand in full repayment of your mortgage loan at any time, like just on a whim. Well, this was a lot like asking for the moon and the stars, so no borrower really worried about that clause. Well, when the stock market crashed on October 29th, 1929, millions of investors lost huge sums of money, a lot of it on margin. That just meant that people borrowed to invest in the stock market. Back then, yep, you could easily buy $10 a stock for $1. Since the value of the stocks dropped, few investors wanted to sell, so they had to go to the bank and take out cash to cover their margin call. Well, it didn't take long for the banks to just run out of cash, so they started calling mortgage loans due from good Americans who were faithfully making their mortgage payments every month. But there still wasn't any demand to buy these homes in the Great Depression, so prices continued to drop 90 years ago. Well, to cover the margin calls, brokers were forced to sell stocks, and once again, there was not a market for stocks, so the prices kept dropping. Ultimately, the Great Depression saw the stock market fall more than 75% from its 1929 highs. More than half the nation's banks failed. Millions of homeowners couldn't raise the cash that they needed to pay off their loans, so they lost their homes. It was out of this crisis that this fear-based American mantra was born, and what it said was, always own your home outright and never carry a mortgage. Well, the reasoning behind America's rationale was pretty simple then. If the economy fell to pieces, well, you figure at least you still had your home, and the bank couldn't take it away from you. All right, well, that actually made some thread of sense then. Maybe you couldn't put much food on the table or pay your bills, but at least your home was secure that way. Well, ever since the Great Depression, new laws have been introduced, and it makes it illegal for banks to call your loan due. They cannot do that anymore. So understand that the bank can no longer call you up and say, hey, we're running a little short on cash. We need you to pay off your mortgage loan in the next 30 days. That simply cannot happen today. Also, the Fed is now quick to infuse money into the system if there is a run on banks, as we saw in 1987. We saw infusions with quantitative easing 10, 12 years ago. And also the FDIC was created to insure banks. Still, you can see how this fear of losing people's home cut right to the heart of what they see as sacred and secure. That became instilled in the hearts and minds of the American people, and they quickly grew to then fear their mortgage, because in the 1950s and 60s, families would still throw mortgage burning parties to celebrate paying off their home. And so because of this fear of the mortgage, for 90 years now, most people have overlooked the opportunity that your mortgage provides to build your finances rather than jeopardize them. So there's a reason why people hate their mortgage and why you really shouldn't. Many people hate their mortgage because they know that over the life of a 30-year loan, they will spend more in interest than the house cost them in the first place in some cases. So to save money, it becomes very tempting to either make a big down payment up front or to make extra monthly principal payments along the way. Well, unfortunately, saving money is not the same as making money, or put another way, paying off debt. That is not the same as accumulating assets. So by tackling the mortgage payoff first and the investing goal second, a lot of people fail to consider the important role a mortgage plays in your financial freedom. Every dollar you give the bank toward a mortgage paydown, that is a dollar then that you did not invest. While paying off the mortgage saves you interest, it denies you the opportunity to earn greater interest with that money. Let's say your monthly mortgage payment is $2,000. And you decide this month to pay $2,100, an extra $100 toward your principal paydown. All right, well then here is what you're saying to the bank. Hey, Mr. Banker, here's an extra $100 principal payment. Don't pay me any interest on it. If I need it back, I'll pay you fees, and I'll borrow it back on your terms. Oh, and plus I'll prove to you that I qualify again in the first place, or at least I'll try to prove that to you. I mean, do you know someone that's still doing something like this? Yes, some people are still doing that. That is fear. That is scarcity. That is a lack of education rather than knowledge and abundance and mastery. They're being a servant to money rather than a master of it. Because money that you give the bank, that's money that you're never going to see again unless you refinance or sell that property, and that's whether the property is a primary residence or it's one of your income properties. So why separate the equity from your home then? Why would you want to have the equity removed from your home? There are actually three primary reasons, which I've discussed before, but it's been a few years. It is for liquidity, safety, and rate of return. There are many more reasons too, but let's just focus on these three reasons for not keeping equity in your home. Number one, how liquid is the equity? Can you get your money back when you want it? No, you can't. It's behind a wall when it's locked up in home equity. Secondly, how safe is your equity? Is it guaranteed or insured in any way? No, equity's not. And then what rate of return can you expect with that equity locked up in a property now? Exactly zero. Home equity fails all three tests of a prudent investment: safety, liquidity, and rate of return. So why separate equity to increase liquidity? Well, one of the biggest misunderstandings in both the real estate world and the mortgage world is that your mortgage is really a loan against your income more so than a loan against the value of your house. Without an income, in most cases, you just can't get a loan. So if you suddenly experience difficult financial times, would you have $50K of liquid cash to help you make your mortgage payment, or have an additional $50K of equity, therefore instead already trapped in your home? Almost every person who has ever lost their home to foreclosure, they would have been better off if they had their equity separated from their home in a liquid, safe, conservative side fund that could be used to make mortgage payments during their time of need. And the importance of liquidity, that really becomes clear more often than you think, like when the stock market crashed in October of 1987, or March of 2000, or September of 2008. Now, before each of those events happened, if someone had advised you to sell your stocks and convert to cash, they would have been a hero. They would have been your savior. Or if you had enough liquidity, you could have weathered the storm. Those with other liquid assets, they were able to remain invested, and they were rewarded as the market rebounded and recovered fully and sometimes pretty quickly. But those without liquidity, then you're forced to sell when the market's down, and then you have to deal with big losses. People learned, it is better to have access to the equity or value of your home and not need it than it is to need it and not be able to get at it at all. Now, of course, I don't advocate for people to have much exposure to stocks because that generally is not where wealth is created. It might be where wealth is maintained. But if you want to build wealth, limit your exposure to stocks and maintain small equity positions in many income-producing properties. That's the formula. But to reduce the risk of foreclosure during unforeseen setbacks, keep your mortgage balance as high as possible. Is your home really safe? Unfortunately, a lot of home buyers have the misconception that paying down their mortgage quickly is the best method of reducing the risk of foreclosure on their homes. In reality, the exact opposite is true. Just the exact opposite is true. As you pay down your mortgage, you are perhaps unknowingly transferring the risk away from the bank and right onto yourself. When the mortgage balance is high, the bank carries the most risk. When your mortgage balance is low, you bear the risk. Think about it from the banker's perspective. With your low mortgage balance, the bank is in a great position because they stand to make a nice profit if you default, because a lot of your loan has been paid off. Besides assuming unnecessary risk, a lot of people who scrape up every bit of extra money they can to apply against their principal, they often find themselves with no liquidity, and when tough times come, they find themselves scrambling to make their mortgage payments. Just imagine this scenario. We're going to assume that you are the mortgage banker at a bank. Let's put you in this position. You've got to listen closely here. You're the banker, you're sitting in your cushy leather chair in your corner office, and you're looking at your loan portfolio as this mortgage banker that you are, and you have 100 loans that are delinquent. All of the loans are for homes valued at $600K. Okay, so you've got all 100 of these $600K homes, and your borrower payments have become delinquent on every single one of them. Some of the loan balances are $300,000, but with some they owe you $500,000. Well, suddenly, let's say there is a glut of homes on the market in a foreclosure crisis or something, and now all the homes go from $600K in value down to only $400K. All right, well, now some homes are underwater. Well, which homes do you, as the banker, foreclose on first? Well, it's going to be the borrowers that owe you the least amount of money, of course, because after all, as a banker, you'd make money taking back those homes, but you'd lose money trying to sell a home for $400K when you still would have been owed $500K on it if you just instead keep that property with the high loan balance in your portfolio. See, banks have been known to contact delinquent homeowners with high mortgage balances and offer assistance to those people because the bank still owed a lot of money. So the bank's not going to try to foreclose on them. Well, they extend a hand, an olive branch to those borrowers that have those high mortgage balances. In that case, as a mortgage banker in your plush leather chair, you're going to get on the phone with your homeowner borrower and you're going to say, hey, we understand you're going through some really tough times. Is there anything we can do to help you out? We really want you to be able to keep your home, because the last thing the bank wants to do is take back a home that they're going to lose money reselling, because that homeowner smartly kept their mortgage balance high, because that homeowner that still owes the bank a lot, well, banks don't want to disrupt that arrangement. See? So that example's over with. You're no longer the mortgage banker. You can see how you would think, though, if you were one. You would foreclose on those homeowners that owe you the least. They are those borrowers with the lower mortgage balances. So then you, as the owner of your home or income property, you want to keep your mortgage balance high and your equity position low. If you fall ill or you become incapacitated in a car accident and you're not able to work, you want to be sure that your family is protected. Well, if you're in a hospital bed, or worse, you're gone, the bank is going to foreclose on those homes that have that low mortgage balance first. And now your family might have to be the ones that deal with that. It's those people that have the high mortgage loan balance. They're going to get the workouts. They're going to get the short sales. They're going to get the concessions from the bank. More equity is more risk. See, now you know how the bankers feel. It's easy to vilify banks for being ruthless and foreclosing on people with high equity positions, because if you were given two equally difficult tasks, which one would you do first? Okay, if you had two wheelbarrows sitting in front of you, you had to push each one up a hill. One was empty, the other had 100 pounds of concrete in it that you had to grunt and struggle to push up the hill, but both of these tasks paid you the same. Which wheelbarrow are you going to push up the hill first? It's the light, empty one. You know, it's interesting to note, too, during the Great Depression, the Hilton chain of hotels, they were deeply affected by the stock market crash I described. Hilton couldn't make their mortgage loan payments. And you know what saved Hilton from financial ruin? They were so leveraged. In other words, they owed so much more on their property than it was worth that the banks couldn't afford to bother wasting their time foreclosing on it. So do what the Hiltons did in the Great Depression. The Hiltons understood the value of keeping high mortgage balances, thereby keeping the risk on the banks. As we move closer to present day here, 2021, look back over the past several years. Hurricane-ravaged homeowners in Florida or New Orleans or Houston, or perhaps even wildfire-damaged homes in California, they often would have been better off had they removed a large portion of their equity and put it in other cash-flowing properties around the country, or they would have been better off even keeping it in a safe and liquid side fund that's accessible in a time of need. And you got to ask yourself, too, if you're a resident of, say, an earthquake hotbed like California or Alaska or Japan, and you own $1 million home during an earthquake in California, and you didn't have earthquake insurance like many don't, would you rather have your equity trapped in the home, or would you rather have more of it in income-producing properties in the Midwest and South like we talk about so much here? If equity were trapped in the California home, your equity could be lost along with the house in the earthquake. And you got to think about litigation too. In the event of a widespread disaster where an insurance company could be at risk with making all these massive payouts to tons of homeowners, well, that insurance company, they often have incentives to come up with reasons not to pay the insurance claim or delay paying your claim, probably at a time when you and your family are displaced and vulnerable and staying in a modest hotel while your life is in a shambles. We saw this happen in national disasters not too long ago. If your home is rendered uninhabitable in the event of a natural disaster, and then there's a dispute about what exactly damaged your home, was it the hurricane's wind, or was it the storm surge, or the wind that led to the storm surge, or the hurricane's rain that led to the flood, and all this stuff, well, then what can you make a claim for? I mean, you just don't want to find yourself in that scenario where you have to hire a lawyer to fight the insurance company, especially at a time when your family's vulnerable and you're uprooted, all staying in transient housing. Well, if you have a lot of skin in the game, therefore a lot of equity in your home, you're going to be the one most likely to have to research what legal counsel is the best, and then you're going to have to hire and pay for and retain legal counsel against the insurance company. But if you don't have much skin in the game and you've left the bank with the greater equity position, then yeah, the bank will have the incentive to want to hire the attorney and do all that stuff because you still owe the bank a lot of money for that home. That bank is counting on you. They want to keep that deal in place. So see, with every mortgage paydown that you make, you have increased the bank security in this property risk, and you've decreased your own security, and you've decreased your own peace of mind, and you've lowered your returns. More equity is more risk. And see, you probably thought it was the opposite. Previously, you thought paying down a mortgage increased your feeling of security. Sometimes you can get insurance to prevent risk of loss in the event of a tornado or hurricane, earthquake, or a fire. But see, even then, there is no such thing as property equity insurance. You have never seen a home equity insurance policy. There's nothing to protect against that. The homeowner with the least financial education is the most likely to get foreclosed upon first. What if you've got a lot of equity in a property and a house guest slips and falls on your icy sidewalk and wants to sue you? We live in a litigious society. Well, when that house guest's plaintiff attorney sees that you don't have much low-hanging fruit as equity to go after, well, then the lawsuit might never come your way in the first place. A high mortgage balance is an effective asset protection strategy. Some people pay down their property's mortgages, which means they lose leverage and increase their risk, and then they have all these LLC layers that they have to maintain instead. Well, keep a high mortgage balance. Make the bank share in the risk with you. Again, that's really an example of making other people's money work for you. Yep, other people's money, the bank's money, is helping protect you. My personal home, primary residence, still has only about 20% equity in it. I've lived in it more than 8 years. I practice what I preach. I don't let dead, risky equity accumulate. This limits my risk. It's increased my liquidity, so instead I can turn these equity dollars into down payments on more income properties across the nation, and it increases my overall rate of return substantially. You've got to think about separating equity to increase your rate of return as well. And I've got a question for you. How about this? What do you think the rate of return from home equity was in Springfield, Massachusetts over the last 3 years? Or what about the rate of return from equity in Austin, Texas? What do you think that is for the last 1 year? Any guesses? Just rough ballpark. Oh, come on. You know these are trick questions. The longtime GRE listener knows the answer. The truth is, it doesn't matter where you live or how fast the homes are appreciating or depreciating because the return from home equity is always the same. It is zero. We have a misconception that because our home appreciates or our mortgage balance is going down, that the equity has a rate of return, and that is just not true. Home equity has no rate of return. Home values fluctuate instead on market conditions. It's got nothing to do with your mortgage balance. Your home or your income property's value fluctuates on population growth or contraction or job growth, supply versus demand, or the remaining availability of developable land in your area, and all kinds of other factors. But the equity in your home has zero relation to the home's value. Zero. Equity is in no way responsible for the home's appreciation, so the equity just simply sits idle in the home without a rate of return. Assume you have a rental property worth $100K that you own free and clear. Just think about this. If it appreciates $5K up to $105K, then you've got that 5% gain. Alternatively, if you have a $100K rental property with just $20K of equity in it and the home appreciates 5%, you still own an asset worth $105K at the end of the year, but now you've got a 25% return on your skin in the game because you're leveraged when you've only got a small amount invested, not just a 5% return like you would if the home were paid off. That's because when you're leveraged, you got a 5% return on both your 20% down and the 80% borrowed from the bank. The return on both of those is yours, so the market provides the return, whether the equity is there or not. Homeowners would actually be better off burying money in their backyards than paying down their mortgages, because money buried in the backyard is liquid, assuming that you can find it, and it is safe, assuming that no one else finds it. However, neither one is earning a rate of return. It's actually losing due to inflation. So, there are some things in life that appear to make your life better, but they don't. Think about autocorrect. Well, paying down low interest rate mortgage debt is one of those things as well. Some things in life are hard to figure out, like why restaurants put so much ice in a cold drink, or that people think that they need to be debt-free without thinking through what that really means. or what they really want. I've got more on this because it's a topic that I have a lot of energy on here. I'm bringing you this week's show from Scottsdale, Arizona here, which is just outside Phoenix. If you think that someone could benefit from this information and they just don't know about podcasts, then you can tell them about the Get Rich Education phone app for both Apple and Android. It's easy to listen to the show there at the Get Rich Education phone app. More straight ahead, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Congress just made it possible to get up to $100,000 out of your current 401k or TSP to invest in real estate, gold, or even your own business. That's even if you're still working, and avoid the IRA UBIT tax. The thing is, you can get your money tax and penalty free for a limited time. The EQRP is your secret weapon. With the CARES Act expiring soon, the EQRP company helps you unleash your retirement funds now. Learn more and text message EQRP in all capital letters to 72,000. Most rental property investors choose either cash flow or home price appreciation, but one real estate market can give you both. Jacksonville, Florida, with 27% lower home prices than the national median, 1% higher gross rents, and Jacksonville has appreciated 34% more than other comparable cash flow markets over the last 30 years. Get positive cash flow today and appreciation for tomorrow. To invest for cash flow and growth in Jacksonville, go to cashflowandgrowth.com.
This is Rich Dad, Poor Dad, author of Robert Kiyosaki. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold. And the reason I respect Keith, he's a very strong, smart, bright young man.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. I am squarely and thoroughly telling you why debt-free is dumb today. Suppose you were offered that investment that could never go up in value but might go down. How much of it would you want? Hopefully none. That investment is home equity. It has no rate of return, so it cannot go up in value but only go down if the real estate market declines or the homeowner experiences an uninsured loss like a natural disaster or your own body or mind's disability or a foreclosure. That's why rather than paying down any mortgage, instead, once equity accumulates, I use cash out refinances and 1031 tax-deferred exchanges to invest that dollar into more cash-flowing property or separate it into a liquid side fund. That's exactly how I built my portfolio to financial freedom without the addition of very much of my own outside money. What if the market goes down? Well, I bought for cash flow anyway, so it won't crash the portfolio. This is investing for fundamental income production and not speculative capital gains investing. Since the return from home equity is always zero, I want to reduce that equity exposure that I have in any one property. But you've got to note that borrowing equity out of a property, that incurs an interest rate expense to you. But as long as I beat that interest rate expense incurred with the return from that reinvested dollar, now I'm dollars ahead. And if I can borrow, say, at a 3 or 4% interest rate, sheesh, I've talked a number of times on how investing into new cash-flowing turnkey income property with long-term fixed interest rate debt pays you 5 ways at the same time, so that returns of 30% per annum are actually common, but you need the cash flow portion of the reinvested dollar in the income property to cover your debt. Not the total ROI, but the cash flow. You need the cash-on-cash return portion alone. Of those 5 ways you're paid, you need that to beat the mortgage interest rate because your debt has got to be serviced with cash, not equity. So you can't just borrow to oblivion such that you're upside down on a total monthly basis. Harvesting equity increases your velocity of money too, rather than letting your equity slowly cut too deeply into any one property. Accelerating loan paydowns, that cuts your leverage ratio. We discussed leverage ratios before here on Get Rich Education. Let's talk about the cost of not borrowing, which is really employment cost versus opportunity cost. When homeowners separate equity to reposition it into more income property, or even that safe liquid side fund, a mortgage payment is created on the portion that you've borrowed out. Well, that payment is considered the employment cost. What a lot of people don't understand is when we leave equity trapped in our home, We incur the same cost, but we call it an opportunity cost. The money that's parked in your home doing nothing could be put to work earning you something. So create arbitrage for yourself. That means borrowing at a lower rate and investing at a higher rate, just like the banks do. You basically learn to be your own banker. You're using the principles that banks and credit unions use. And this way you can amass a fortune while you expand and live the life you want rather than eating top ramen and limiting yourself to one annual vacation. You can enhance your net worth greatly by optimizing the assets that you already have. By being your own banker and thinking this way, you really can make millions extra. It is not necessary to have a large chunk of equity in your home to benefit from using your mortgage to create wealth either. A lot of homeowners without a large equity balance have benefited by simply moving to a more strategic mortgage where you can pay less to your mortgage company every month and then save or invest more each month. Even if you don't have a high equity position, for example, if you have a 15-year loan, now you can increase your cash flow by switching it to a 30-year loan. I once made the same mistake myself. One time I had a 15-year loan on my own home. It was a home with a nice view of an Alaskan lake, by the way. And in fact, I switched it to a 30-year once I understood all of this. Say that your 15-year loan monthly payment is $1,100 more than your 30-year payment. Well, wouldn't you rather have $1,100 monthly in liquidity or have it for more to invest into an income-producing asset rather than accelerate equity paydown? On an income property, if you have a 15-year loan rather than a 30-year loan, that property probably won't cash flow either unless you would have a ton of equity into it. So I actually favor interest-only loans the most, as counterintuitive as that sounds, but they can be pretty hard to find these days. And interest-only loans, they got a really bad name about 15 years ago. Some people took out those loans because not paying principal, that was the only way that they could afford a property that didn't even generate income. That's not what I'm talking about here. I favor interest-onlys because rather than having your extra dollars go into principal, that goes right into your pocket as cash flow instead. With income property, again, both tenants and inflation already make your mortgage principal balance erode for you. If you're the one that gets involved with making extra principal paydowns, that's something that only corrodes your cash flow dollar per dollar. Every $250 extra principal payment, that just reduced your cash flow by $250. Let's just look at another example. I gave one similar to this in the book that I wrote in 2017. Let's say you own a $300K home. Just for ease of numbers, your home appreciates 10%, goes up to $330K. Let me ask you, did it matter how much equity was in the home? No, it didn't. I think we've established this because either appreciation or loss in value, that has nothing to do with your skin in the game, nothing to do with the equity inside the walls of your home, but everything to do with what's happening outside the walls of your home, like demographic trends or all those other things. That's what affects market value. But look, conversely, what about this scenario? The value of your $300K home instead, let's say it plummets to $200K in value. Well, then if you had $100K of property equity exposed, it's all gone. It's all wiped out. So though your home fell in value 33% then, your equity value fell 100%. Now you understand why I say that property equity is unsafe. So number one, prevent equity from accumulating. And number two, spread it out into other properties in a few different geographies. That's leverage. So you've set all these little levers around various geographic markets. Just imagine a little wedge, like a doorstop or something beneath each of these homes' foundations, levering them up. When you do that, you've planted a small equity seed that has big room for growth in a new property. So think big picture. Rather than thinking about retiring mortgages, you can acquire mortgages and you can integrate them into your financial plan. Rather than fighting to get rid of mortgages like it's an enemy, I've embraced them. I brought them onto my side, And I don't want them to go away because I know that a mortgage is a tool. I consider it like a good friend. You can think of your mortgage then not as a competitor, but as a collaborator. And life is a lot more harmonious and plentiful when you turn competitors into collaborators in business and everything else. So I don't just enjoy collecting properties, I enjoy collecting the mortgages that are tied to them. Every time I don't want to have my home or any income property paid off by the time I'm 40 or 60 or 80. When I pull equity from one property and use it as a down payment into another property, understand that I actually haven't lost any equity at all, although I might have a corner chipped off for closing costs or agent commissions. But really, rather than losing equity, I've just transferred equity from one property into another. It's still my equity. It's still your equity. Now consider that when I pull equity from my primary residence to put it into an income property, I typically incur a higher home mortgage payment than what I had previously then. But as long as the difference between the new home mortgage payment amount and the old payment amount is exceeded by the positive cash flow that I receive from the new rental property, well then I'm dollars ahead on a monthly basis, plus I have all the other benefits of owning a real estate portfolio that's just greater in value overall. Now I have two properties to potentially appreciate in value rather than one. So before, rather than just having a $300K home, you might still have your $300K home plus a $200K income property, all with the same amount of equity. Plus greater tax benefits, monthly cash flow, you got more loan amortization, more inflation hedging benefits of long-term fixed interest rate debt. And as I go through life, I find that those with less financial education are more likely to say something like, oh, I can't wait until I have this property paid off. Oh, hearing this is sort of like when someone tells me they have a boatload of money saved at the bank earning 0.5% interest. I'm like, okay, that's not completely bad in itself because I see some potential there, but you're not just going to leave it there. What are you going to do with it? Money earning nothing at the bank, though, that could actually be better than home equity because at least it's more liquid. So understanding this stuff and putting it into practice, that's how I, as an investor, got ahead farther, faster. Instead of doing things like learning how to replace garage doors or fix a toilet flapper in the most efficient way, I still don't know how to do any of that stuff. I learned about big picture forces like arbitrage, leverage, cash flow, inflation, and smart equity management like we're talking about here. It's more powerful. That's the stuff that's going to get you ahead farther, faster than cleaning the clothing dryer exhaust ducts on your income property forever. So it's about outsourcing those lower use tasks and replacing them with higher use tasks. You're going to be living better than you ever thought you could. I think some people get content with being their own landlord because they just don't realize what else they can do with their time. Think big picture, think scalability, think of building an empire with these powerful investing concepts and not so much self-managing properties over the long term. With all these new construction income properties today, though, I will say that so few things go wrong that you might be able to manage those remotely. But a lot of these DIYers, instead, they beat around in an old Ford pickup truck with a ladder and some scaffolding rattling around the back, managing their own properties. And you might do that in the beginning, but you can often scale up sooner than you think when you understand some of these things. And some people just want to rationalize that their life isn't so bad compared to those without clean drinking water in poor parts of the world or something. So they just stay content on trying to change the furnace filters at the rental property themselves. But you don't have to be your on-site manager or your laborer. As an investor, you've already got laborers standing by just waiting to work for you, but these laborers have names like tenants and leverage and arbitrage and inflation. They're like laborers working for you. And this is exciting stuff. This is get rich in your sleep stuff when you understand and embrace it. Now, if you had $1 to use and you'd have to use it to either pay down principal or pay it toward interest, well, then, of course, you'd rather pay down principal because you'd have a chance at getting that dollar back later. If it's paid toward interest, it's just gone. But there's still a wall that's being built between you and your dollar now if it goes toward principal. Now, if someone would ask me if I want more property equity than I currently have, like someone was just looking to gift some equity to me, well, sure, I'd take it, but I'd think of it like I've been given the ability to now disperse and distribute seeds and use them as levers and spread them into more properties and employ those funds, not leave them idle. And the thing is, you can't merely understand this stuff or else it's really not going to help you. You've got to do it. You've got to act. Mere knowledge does not do you any good. I have conscientiously decided that I'm going to be abundant. I'm going to go out and I am going to control more. And there are a few limits here. You probably don't want to lock up everything in equity spread across various properties. It's good to keep some liquidity on hand. I've talked about how it's a good idea to have at least 3 to 5% of your total real estate portfolio's value in liquid funds as reserves. Consider that if you get underwater on your primary residence, that could make it hard for you to move if you want to move. Well, then that would be a risk if you don't have some liquidity on hand to take care of that. And remember too, before you can even get a mortgage, your underwriter is going to make sure that you do have reserves. I think another mindset is to think about your control of a property. You know, whether you have a 5% equity position in your property or a 50 or 60 or 80% equity position or a 100% equity position in your property, you still have the same right to tear down the fence at your home's backyard or paint your home yellow or blue or add a carport to a rental property that you own. So your equity position, that doesn't affect your control at all. Lower equity, same control. Less property equity, that can also increase your tax deductions because mortgage interest is typically tax deductible. So no one achieves financial freedom just by eliminating their debt. In fact, debt elimination, that often slows financial freedom. Outsource that debt to your tenant. Debt-free is dumb. And some people might just say, oh, well, eliminating the mortgage, that would just make me feel good, even if it doesn't make sense. That way I won't owe anyone anything. Consider what that good feeling is costing you. Once you're educated, debt-free does not feel so good. You are taking steps away from being financially free. And if you pay off the mortgage on your home, consider that you still are going to have a monthly housing payment. You're still going to have to pay property taxes. You're still going to have to pay property insurance. You're still going to have to pay maintenance and repairs and utilities and maybe HOA dues. So even complete elimination of a mortgage payment, that doesn't nearly eliminate your housing payment. So you can stop fighting it and embrace the fact that financially free beats debt free. In fact, if you made extra principal payments on a 30-year loan such that you paid off your home in just 20 years, all you might have done is cut your housing payment in half. That's it. You might have only halved it. And I know you might be thinking that your monthly housing payment is maybe 3/4 mortgage and 1/4 other expenses. But look, over 20 years, your principal and interest payment stays fixed and all those other housing expenses rise with inflation. So accelerating your principal payments to pay it off 10 years early and grinding to do that, it might just mean that all you've really done is cut your housing payment in half. That's your big reward. So the reward to doing this isn't even as great as what a lot of people think. Even after all this scrimping and saving and sacrificing and this degradation in the quality of your life that you'll never get back, just for the result of a substantially earlier mortgage payoff, that result is not going to make you feel like you've won. So even though I have the ability to pay off my home, that would be a pretty financially ignorant thing for me to do. All the income-producing property that I could not tie up in order to make the home pay off. And some people say they don't want to pull equity from their primary residence because they say that their existing mortgage is at such a low interest rate, 4% or 3% or even lower, or that they would have to recast their amortization schedule. Well, oftentimes you can keep your first loan in place, not touch that, not recast it, not disturb that rock bottom interest rate either, and then add a home equity loan or a home equity line of credit as a second mortgage onto the property so that you can increase your velocity of money. Keep that first loan in place. Homes are meant to house you and house your family, not store cash. So I don't know whether you maintain a net worth statement or not. I suggest you do, but in either case, on the left side of the sheet, there are a list of assets and your total asset value at the bottom. On the right side of your sheet are a list of your debts with that total debt value at the bottom. I add a third column on the far right. That is asset minus debt. It shows the equity amount that I have in each property. And that way I can easily see the equity percent that I have in each property. And once a property has more than 35 or 40% equity in it, well, that's when I know it's time to start looking around to reposition it, keep my leverage ratio high, and keep my use of other people's money high. So this is money talking here. When money talks, you've got to listen and not revert to thinking about what your granddad thought or what your uncle thought, or revert to that depression era of thinking that I mentioned earlier in the show. And most or all of these principles that I talked about today are timeless principles. They were valid decades ago, just like they are today. This was all true even when mortgage interest rates were 16 or 18% in the early 80s. But you can take even greater advantage of this financially free, beats debt free formula today in the early 2020s when mortgage interest rates are at breathtaking lows. It has never been more advantageous. So these low rates just put an exclamation point on everything that I've been discussing with you today. You've really got to go against the beliefs of traditional, old-fashioned thinking. And especially if you're newer to the show here, maybe what you previously thought was black is really white, and what you thought was dark is light. If you act, your financial forecast looks sunnier than you thought. You won't be able to retire if you send your money away to retire locked up in a home's walls. You'll need to spend more of your life working. And some say that a primary residence is a liability because it takes money out of your pocket every month, and an asset puts money into your pocket every month. So then consider not sinking so much of your equity into a liability. You can keep your skin in the game in this liability to a minimum and place that equity into assets, whether that's cash flowing real estate assets in the best markets or perhaps something else. If your home is a financial liability, well, then it's actually less of a liability to you when the equity is intelligently managed. I don't like to tell people exactly what they should do, but if this makes sense to you, you've got to act instead of sit idle. And these are the kinds of decisions that shape you and your family's life. These are the things that open up time for yourself, financial freedom for yourself, that get your kid to private school if that's important to you, or get your family to visit New York's Freedom Tower, or get your family to hike to the bottom of Arizona's Grand Canyon there at the Colorado River, rather than deferring life until some fictitious someday. The good news here is that you might have more money to invest than you thought you had, or money that you didn't even know that you had. You've got to be responsible, though, converting home equity into a durable investment before being a consumer. Produce before you consume. But this is how I grew my portfolio. Not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what I did. But I'll tell you one thing. Working from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with a 1-hour lunch break, Monday to Friday, at a W-2 job with a 401k, that typically doesn't give you financial freedom until you're old, unless you're really a high net worth individual. You know the old Chinese proverb, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime? Well, which one of those things sound better to you? Teaching a man to fish or giving a man or woman a fish? Well, it's doing both. That's the abundance mentality. So at Get Rich Education, we teach a man to fish. Well, then where do you actually find the income properties in the best markets with in-place property management so you can reposition your home equity if you so choose? Well, we also give a man a fish at greturnkey.com, where there are more than 15 markets that I've hand-selected myself. This is a lineup of markets and providers, many of whom I've invested with myself, where you can download a real estate report on investor advantage metros, read it at your leisure, and then that report also has the real estate provider information so you can follow up with them, so should you so choose, and get some property. Often it is those markets in the Midwest and South. greturnkey.com is in the show notes as well, so it's just never been easier. If you found today's episode important and paradigm shifting and something that people really need to hear, consider taking a screenshot of your podcast player here on your phone and posting it on your favorite social media platform, sharing it with friends that way. Thank you for being here, but again, you aren't here for me, you are here for you. I'll be back next week to help you build your wealth. Remember, home equity is a poor investment, and oftentimes, debt-free is dumb, and don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.